The fluorescent aisles of the discount store stretched endlessly under buzzing white light, each shelf packed with back-to-school supplies marked down for clearance. The girl couldn't have been more than 9 years old, standing alone before a wall of notebooks, her fingers trailing across covers decorated with unicorns and galaxies and cartoon characters. She wore sneakers with holes near the toes, jeans that ended 2 inches above her ankles, and a faded purple t-shirt that had been washed so many times the original design was barely visible. Her backpack, slung over one shoulder, had been repaired with duct tape in 3 places. She picked up a notebook with holographic stars on the cover, turned it over to check the price, and carefully placed it in her basket. Then she added a package of mechanical pencils, a pink eraser shaped like a cat, and a set of highlighters. Her hands moved with practiced precision, selecting each item after consideration, building a small collection of things that would make 4th grade feel special. When she reached for a calculator, the cheap kind with large buttons and a cracked display model on the shelf, she paused, studying the price tag for a long moment before adding it to her basket. At the end of the aisle, a man in an expensive charcoal suit watched her. He'd come in for batteries, nothing more, a quick errand between board meetings and a day already packed with conference calls and contract negotiations. His watch cost more than most people earned in 6 months. His shoes were Italian leather, custom-fitted. The store itself was beneath his usual standards, but it was close to his downtown office, and time was a currency he valued above all others. He noticed the girl because she moved differently than the other shoppers. Where they rushed, she deliberated. Where they grabbed, she calculated. There was a mathematics to her shopping, a careful accounting visible in the way she kept returning to her basket, counting items, recounting them, her lips moving silently. The man, James Whitmore, though his name appeared on buildings and in financial publications more often than in casual conversation, had built his empire through observation. He'd made his first million recognizing patterns others missed, inefficiencies in systems everyone else accepted as fixed. He watched now with the same analytical focus he brought to quarterly reports and market analyses. The girl moved to the next aisle, comparing prices on folders. She selected the plainest ones, brown cardboard without designs, because they cost 30 cents less than the decorated versions. She added a single composition notebook, college-ruled, and a box of 16 crayons instead of the 6-to-4 count box with the built-in sharpener. Her basket was filling, but slowly, each addition waited with consideration. A woman pushing a cart piled high with supplies for multiple children nearly collided with the girl, didn't apologize, kept moving. The girl pressed herself against the shelf to let the woman pass, then returned to her methodical selection process. She picked up a protractor, studied it, put it back. Picked up a ruler, checked the price, kept it. James followed at a distance, though he couldn't have explained why. Something about the girl's focus, her solitary determination, had hooked his attention. He'd seen desperation before, in boardrooms, in negotiations, in the faces of entrepreneurs pitching their last-chance ideas. This was different. This was dignified poverty, the kind that didn't announce itself, that tried very hard to look like everything was fine. The girl reached the school supply checkout lanes at the front of the store. She set her basket on the counter and began removing items one by one, arranging them in a careful line. The cashier, a teenager with purple hair and multiple piercings, began scanning without looking up from her phone. The register beeped with each item. The girl watched the total climbing on the small display screen. Beep. $2.47. Beep. $4.82. Beep. $7.19. The girl's hand hovered over her backpack, where a small zippered pocket bulged slightly. She unzipped it and pulled out a sandwich bag filled with coins and crumpled bills. Quarters, dimes, nickels. Several worn $1 bills. 2 fives that had been folded and unfolded so many times they were soft as fabric. Beep. $9.66. Beep. $12.33. Beep. $15.07. The cashier finished scanning, the total glowing on the screen, $23.84. The girl looked at the money in the plastic bag. Her fingers trembled slightly as she began counting, separating coins into small piles on the counter. The line behind her was growing. A woman with a cart full of cleaning supplies sighed audibly. A man in a business suit checked his watch. The girl counted carefully. twice, 3 times. Then she looked up at the cashier, her face composed but her eyes bright with held-back tears. She pointed to several items, the highlighters, the eraser, the decorated notebook, and asked the cashier to remove them from the purchase. The teenager sighed, picking up the items with obvious annoyance, voiding them from the transaction. The new total appeared, $18.92. The girl counted again. Still not enough. She pointed to the mechanical pencils. Those too. $16.47. She counted once more, her small fingers sorting through coins with the precision of a jeweler examining stones. She looked at the screen, looked at her money, looked back at the remaining items on the counter. If you're watching this, comment below where you're from, because what happens next is a story that needs to be heard everywhere. The girl reached for the calculator, the last item she'd selected, the one tool that would actually help her succeed in math class rather than just complete the homework. Her teacher had said calculators were mandatory this year. Every student needed one. Her hand closed around it, prepared to hand it back to the cashier. Prepared to start 4th grade without the supplies that would mark her as different, as less than, as the kid who couldn't afford what everyone else had. James Whitmore stepped forward. He'd made his decision 3 aisles back, though he hadn't consciously known it until this moment. He'd built a reputation for ruthless business decisions, for maximizing profit, for never letting sentiment cloud judgment. He'd fired executives, shuttered divisions, made choices that affected thousands of lives with the stroke of a pen. He'd done it all without hesitation because the numbers demanded it, because the market required it, because success meant making hard choices. But he'd also been 9 years old once. In a different store, in a different decade, with a mother counting change for groceries while he pretended not to notice. He approached the register, his presence commanding immediate attention. The cashier looked up. The girl turned, startled. The people in line shifted their focus. James spoke quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being heard. He told the cashier to add back everything the girl had removed. Then he told her to add one of everything else a 4th grader might need. The good notebooks. The 6 to 4 count crayons. A proper backpack without tape. New shoes. A winter coat from the rack by the door. A scientific calculator, not the cheap kind. Everything. The girl stared at him, her mouth open, her hand still clutching the plastic bag of carefully counted money. She tried to speak but couldn't find words. The cashier stared too, her phone forgotten. The woman with the cleaning supplies had stopped sighing. James pulled out a credit card, the kind with no preset spending limit, the kind that came with personal concierge services and airport lounge access. He handed it to the cashier, who took it with fingers that had suddenly become clumsy. But then the girl did something unexpected. She stepped back. She shook her head. She said she couldn't accept charity. The word hung in the air between them. Charity. She spoke it with the same tone someone might use for insult or accusation. Her chin lifted. Her shoulders squared. She was 9 years old, dressed in clothes that didn't fit, counting coins for school supplies, and she had more pride than most people 2 or 3 times her age. James recognized that pride. He'd carried it himself, decades ago, wearing it like armor against the world's assessment of his worth. He made an offer. Not charity. A challenge. He told her he'd noticed how carefully she'd selected her supplies, how precisely she'd calculated costs, how efficiently she'd managed her resources. He said those were the skills of a successful business person. He proposed a deal. He would purchase everything she needed for school, and in return, she would maintain perfect attendance, submit all assignments on time, and achieve honor roll. If she fulfilled those terms, the debt was forgiven. If she failed, she owed him nothing anyway, because investing in potential was simply good business. The people in line were fully attentive now. Several had their phones out, recording. The cashier's hand hovered over the credit card reader, waiting. The girl looked at James Whitmore, this stranger in an expensive suit who'd turned a moment of private shame into a public spectacle. She looked at the supplies on the counter, everything she needed and more. She looked at the money in her plastic bag, money she'd saved from birthday gifts and odd jobs and coins found in couch cushions, money that wasn't nearly enough. She asked why he would do this. What did he get out of it? James told her the truth. He was betting on her. Just like investors had bet on him when he was young, when he had nothing but ideas and determination. He was simply paying forward what had been paid to him. The girl thought about this. The store's air conditioning hummed. The register lights blinked. Someone in line coughed. Then she extended her hand for a handshake, formal and serious. She agreed to his terms. Perfect attendance. All assignments. On a roll. She would not fail. James shook her hand, her small palm disappearing in his. The cashier completed the transaction, the receipt printing in a long curl of paper. Other employees appeared with shopping bags, loading everything carefully, adding items James pointed out, extra notebooks, backup supplies, things the girl would need as the year progressed. The total came to $347.62. James didn't blink. As the girl prepared to leave, her arms full of bags, James asked her name. She told him, Emily Chen. She asked his. When he answered, she didn't recognize it. She'd never seen his buildings or read the financial publications. She simply nodded, thanked him in a voice struggling to stay steady, and turned toward the door. But James stopped her. One more thing, he said. He pulled out a business card, the expensive kind with embossed lettering, and wrote his personal email address on the back. He told her to send proof, report cards, attendance records, when the school year ended. He would be watching. Emily took the card, studied it, tucked it carefully into her new backpack's front pocket. Then she walked out into the afternoon heat, her silhouette visible through the glass doors as she headed toward the bus stop, carrying everything she'd needed and more. James returned to his waiting car, where his driver had been circling the block. He had 17 emails waiting, 3 calls to return, and a dinner meeting across town in 40 minutes. He settled into the back seat, opened his laptop, and tried to refocus on quarterly projections. But his mind kept returning to the girl's face when she'd placed items back on the counter. The mathematics of poverty. The dignity of her refusal. The courage in her handshake. He'd made 1,000 decisions that day, most of them involving numbers with many more zeros than $347.62. But none of them would matter quite as much as the one he'd just made in a discount store, for a girl whose name he'd learned only at the end. Someone in line had recorded the entire interaction. Within an hour, the video would be uploaded. Within 3 hours, it would have 50,000 views. By morning, it would cross 1 million. But James Whitmore didn't know that yet. He just knew he'd done something that felt right for the first time in a very long while. The video appeared on social media that evening, posted by the woman who'd been standing in line with her cart of cleaning supplies. She'd filmed the entire exchange on her phone, capturing the moment Emily had begun removing items from her purchase, the strangers stepping forward, the handshake that sealed their unusual agreement. The caption read, "Faith in humanity restored. This is what kindness looks like." Within the first hour, 300 people had shared it. Within 3, that number had multiplied to thousands. The algorithm recognized engagement, pushed the video to more feeds, more timelines, more recommendation queues. People watched while eating dinner, while commuting home, while scrolling before sleep. They watched Emily's face as she counted her coins. They watched James Whitmore step into the frame. They watched the handshake between a billionaire and a child. Comments flooded in from across the country. Teachers shared it with colleagues, saying this was why they'd entered education, to give kids like Emily a fighting chance. Parents tagged other parents, asking if they'd seen this yet. Wasn't this beautiful? Didn't this make everything else seem small? Social workers and case managers shared it in professional groups, noting the visible signs they'd been trained to recognize: the outgrown clothes, the careful budgeting, the pride that prevented asking for help. By morning, news outlets had picked up the story. Local reporters tracked down the discount store, interviewed the cashier, requested security footage to supplement the phone video. Someone identified James Whitmore, his name bringing a new dimension to the story. This wasn't just a wealthy stranger. This was one of the most successful investors in the country, a man whose net worth was calculated in billions, who normally appeared in business sections rather than human interest pieces. Financial journalists who'd covered Whitmore for years were stunned. This was the same man known for cold negotiation tactics, for cutting costs without hesitation, for maximizing returns above all other considerations. They'd interviewed him dozens of times and never seen evidence of sentiment or softness. Yet here he was, in grainy phone footage, buying school supplies for a child he'd never met. The story spread across platforms. Television morning shows requested interviews. Radio hosts discussed it between songs. Podcast hosts devoted entire episodes to dissecting the interaction, analyzing what it revealed about poverty in America, about the gaps in public education funding, about the persistence of dignity even in hardship. Emily's school district, recognizing one of their students in the viral video, released a statement praising the generosity of strangers, while also noting their comprehensive free lunch program and school supply assistance initiatives. The statement felt defensive, as if the district needed to explain why one of their fourth graders had been shopping alone with insufficient funds. Parents and community members responded with stories of their own children's needs going unmet, of teachers buying supplies with personal money, of families choosing between food and folders. James Whitmore's office was overwhelmed with interview requests, which his assistant declined with practiced efficiency. He'd given hundreds of interviews over his career, but never about charity or kindness. Those weren't marketable skills in his industry. He'd built his reputation on analysis, on prediction, on the ability to see value where others saw only risk. He had no interest in becoming known for a single gesture captured on camera. But the video had consequences beyond publicity. Other people, inspired by what they'd witnessed, began sharing their own stories of need and generosity. A teacher in Ohio posted about buying winter coats for her entire class. A grocery store manager in Texas described keeping funds to quietly cover shortfalls when customers couldn't afford their purchases. A librarian in Oregon explained how she maintained a drawer of snacks for children who came to the library hungry after school. The stories multiplied, each one revealing the same truth. Poverty existed everywhere, even in wealthy communities, and it wore the face of children trying hard to pretend everything was fine. The video of Emily had simply made visible what many people preferred not to see. 3 weeks after the interaction, James received an email. The sender was Emily Chen, using an address that appeared to be managed by her school system. The message was brief and formal, the writing careful. Dear Mr. Whitmore, I am sending you my first progress report as we agreed. I have perfect attendance so far. All my assignments are turned in. My teacher says I am doing very well in math, especially because of the calculator. Thank you for investing in me. I will not let you down. Sincerely, Emily Chen. Attached was a scanned progress report showing straight A's across all subjects and a note from the teacher. Emily is a model student and a joy to have in class. James read the email 3 times. He'd forgotten about the business card, the request for proof, the terms of their agreement. He'd made the offer instinctively, creating structure around an act of generosity, because structure was how he understood the world. He hadn't expected follow-through. Most promises made by children dissolved under the pressure of time and difficulty. But Emily was keeping her end of the bargain. He drafted a response, report received. Excellent work. Keep going. He sent it, then returned to his actual work, to spreadsheets and projections and the kind of decisions that moved markets. But throughout the day, his attention kept drifting back to that email, to the pride evident in Emily's formal tone, to the teacher's note about joy in the classroom. Another month passed. The video's view count had plateaued at just over 2 million, but it still circulated in certain corners of social media, reshared whenever someone needed proof that good people existed. Emily's story had become part of the internet's permanent collection of uplifting content, filed alongside military homecomings and proposal videos and animals being rescued. James received a second email. Another progress report, more A's, another teacher's note. This time Emily added a line, math is my favorite subject now. We are learning fractions. I understand them better than most kids because I have practice from counting money. The observation struck James as both heartbreaking and brilliant. She turned necessity into education, poverty into preparation. She was learning resilience the hardest way possible, through experience. He responded again, fractions are foundational. Master them. The emails continued monthly. James found himself anticipating them, checking his inbox on the days they typically arrived. Emily's writing improved as the year progressed, her sentences becoming more complex, her vocabulary expanding. She began including small details about school, a science project on solar energy, a book she'd loved about a girl solving mysteries, a field trip to a museum where she'd seen real dinosaur bones. James responded to each one, keeping his replies brief but engaged. He offered advice when relevant. Science will take you further than you imagine. Pay attention. And museums are free education. Go back when you can. 6 months after their meeting in the discount store, James received an email different from the others. Dear Mr. Whitmore, I wanted to tell you something important. My teacher nominated me for a scholarship program that helps students like me go to private school next year. I had to write an essay about someone who influenced me. I wrote about you, not because of the school supplies, but because you saw me when other people looked through me. You made a deal with me like I was a real business person. You trusted that I would keep my promise. I won the scholarship. I get to go to a better school next year with smaller classes and more resources. None of this would have happened if you had just given me charity that day. You gave me something to prove instead. Thank you for believing I could. Sincerely, Emily Chen. James read the email in his office, 43 floors above the city, surrounded by evidence of his success, awards, framed magazine covers, photographs with presidents and celebrities. None of it meant what this email meant. He'd made profitable investments throughout his career, ventures that returned 10 times, 20 times, 100 times their initial capital. He'd turned millions into billions through careful analysis and calculated risk. He'd built an empire. But this was different. This was a little girl who'd been putting back school supplies, who'd counted coins with trembling hands, who'd maintained her dignity even in need. He'd invested $300 and gotten back proof that potential could be recognized, that worth wasn't measured in current circumstances, that a single moment of attention could redirect an entire trajectory. He drafted a response longer than his previous messages. Emily, you earned that scholarship through your own work and commitment. I simply bought supplies. Everything since then has been your doing. The essay, the grades, the attendance, that was you keeping your word. Never forget that you did this. I just watched. Congratulations on the scholarship. Make the most of it. And remember, you don't owe me anything. You already paid the debt through your success. Now pay it forward when you can. That's how the system works. JW. He sent the email, then sat back in his chair, looking out at the city spread below. Somewhere down there, Emily was celebrating her scholarship, preparing for a new school, carrying forward the lesson that investment in human potential was the most valuable transaction anyone could make. Stories like hers were shared constantly in this digital age, passed between people who understood that dignity mattered more than dollars, that a child's potential couldn't be measured by their parents' bank accounts. The video would be watched by viewers from every state, every background, every walk of life, commented on by people seeking proof that the world still contained moments of unexpected grace. They would share the story with others, checking timelines and feeds for more evidence that humanity was worth believing in. And somewhere in all that sharing, all that searching, someone would learn Emily's lesson. Worth isn't determined by current circumstances. An investment in another person's future is never money wasted. The school year ended in June. Emily sent her final report card via email. Straight A's across all subjects, perfect attendance. A teacher's note that read Emily Chen is one of the most dedicated students I've had in 20 years of teaching. Below the scanned report card, Emily had written, deal completed. Debt forgiven. Thank you for taking a chance on me. James printed the email and filed it in his desk drawer, a record of an investment that had paid returns in ways no balance sheet could capture. He drafted a brief response congratulating her on the achievement, wishing her success at her new school, reminding her that the real work was just beginning. He assumed that would be the end of their correspondence. The deal had been fulfilled. She'd proven herself. The transaction was complete. But 3 days later, another email arrived. Dear Mr. Whitmore, I need to tell you something I didn't say before because I didn't know if I should. The day you met me in the store, I was shopping with money I saved for my birthday and from helping neighbors with yard work. But the reason I was shopping alone was because my mom couldn't come with me. She was working her second shift at the nursing home. She works 2 jobs so I can stay in our apartment and go to decent school. She never finished high school herself because she had me when she was young and had to work instead. Asterisk. Asterisk the calculator you made sure I got. My teacher told the class we needed them for math. My mom said we couldn't afford one right now, but she would get it eventually. I knew she would try, and I knew it would mean skipping something else, like fixing the car or buying her own work shoes that don't have holes. So I decided to save my own money and buy it myself. I thought if I was very careful, I could get just the necessities and maybe the calculator too. Asterisk. Asterisk I'm telling you this because you should know that your investment wasn't just in me. It was in my mom too. When I came home with all those supplies, with the new backpack and the coat and everything, she cried. She didn't know about the video yet or about the deal we made. She just saw that a stranger had helped her daughter when she couldn't. She said it was proof that good people existed, that we weren't alone, that someone saw us even though we try hard to be invisible. Asterisk. Asterisk my mom's name is Jennifer Chen. She's 32 years old. She came to this country when she was 19, pregnant and alone, and she's worked every single day since then to give me a better life. Everything I am is because of her. When you invested in me, you were really investing in her sacrifice. I thought you should know that. Asterisk. Asterisk sincerely, Emily Chen. Asterisk. James read the email twice, then 3 times. Then he stood and walked to his office window, looking down at the city where millions of people were grinding through their own struggles, invisible to those who'd never experienced real hardship. Jennifer Chen, 32 years old, 2 jobs, an unfinished education, a daughter who counted coins and calculated costs and maintained dignity even when putting back school supplies. He understood something then that he hadn't grasped in the store 6 months ago. He hadn't just witnessed a child's poverty. He'd witnessed a mother's sacrifice made visible through her daughter's careful shopping, through outgrown clothes and ration supplies, and a pride that refused to ask for help. He'd built his fortune by recognizing value others missed, by seeing potential in overlooked opportunities. He'd done it again at that discount store register, but he'd only seen half the equation. Emily was the dividend, but Jennifer was the principal investment, the years of work, the sacrificed education, the doubled shifts and skipped meals and worn-out shoes with holes. James returned to his computer and composed a response. Asterisk Emily, thank you for trusting me with this information. You're right that I should know. Would your mother be willing to meet with me? I have a proposition that might interest her. If she agrees, please have her contact my office to arrange a time. And Emily, you're both visible. Never doubt that. JW. Asterisk. 2 days later, his assistant informed him that a Jennifer Chen had called to schedule an appointment. She'd sounded nervous on the phone, asking multiple times if she had the right number, if this was really James Whitmore's office, if this was some kind of mistake. The assistant had assured her it wasn't and scheduled her for Thursday afternoon. When Jennifer arrived, James saw immediately where Emily had gotten her careful dignity. Jennifer wore professional clothes that were clean and pressed but several years out of fashion. Her purse was worn at the edges but well maintained. Her hands showed the evidence of physical labor, rough skin, short nails, the calluses of someone who worked constantly. She sat in the chair across from his desk, her posture straight despite obvious exhaustion. She thanked him for seeing her, for what he'd done for Emily, for the opportunity to meet him in person. Her voice carried an accent that suggested English wasn't her first language, though her grammar was precise. James cut through the pleasantries. He'd asked her here because Emily's emails had revealed something important, raw talent being wasted by circumstance. Emily had potential, but she was only 9 years old. Jennifer was 32, unfinished education, but 13 years of work experience, clearly intelligent and resourceful, capable of managing complex schedules and competing demands. He explained that his company had an internal program for promising individuals who lacked traditional credentials. They started in entry-level positions, but were given training, mentorship, and clear advancement paths. It wasn't charity. They worked harder than conventional hires, had to prove themselves constantly. But for the right person, it offered a trajectory that bypassed the usual degree requirements. Jennifer listened without interrupting. Her hands remained folded in her lap, but James noticed her fingers tighten when he mentioned education requirements being waived, loosened slightly when he explained the work expectations. He continued, The position would be in facilities management initially, coordinating building services, managing vendor relationships, ensuring operations ran smoothly. It required organization, communication skills, problem solving, and the ability to manage multiple priorities. The skills, in other words, of someone who'd successfully raised a child alone while working 2 jobs in a country not her own. The salary would be modest by his company standards but substantial compared to nursing home wages. Full benefits, including health care and education assistance. The education benefit was important. She could finish her high school equivalency, then pursue further education if she wanted. Evening classes, online programs, all covered. One position, one job, but a clear path forward. Jennifer's composure finally cracked. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. She asked why he would do this, what he wanted in return, whether this was somehow about Emily. James told her the truth. He'd built his success by investing in overlooked potential. He'd done it with companies, with technologies, with business models everyone else dismissed. Investing in people was no different. Emily had proven herself through a year of perfect grades and attendance. Jennifer had proven herself through 13 years of unwitnessed sacrifice. This wasn't charity. This was recognition of value the world had failed to price correctly. Jennifer asked when she could start. James smiled, a rare expression from a man known for his severity in business negotiations. He told her Monday, if she could arrange it. His assistant would handle the details, paperwork, orientation, scheduling. As Jennifer prepared to leave, she turned back at the office door. She told him that Emily had been right to write about him in her scholarship essay. Not because of the school supplies. Anyone with money could buy school supplies. But because he'd seen them when they were trying so hard to be invisible. Because he'd looked at a little girl counting coins and seen potential instead of poverty. Because he'd recognized that worth existed separate from wealth. She said Emily was learning more than fractions and science in school. She was learning that dignity mattered, that promises should be kept, that people could surprise you if you gave them the chance. Those lessons, Jennifer said, were worth more than any calculator. After she left, James sat in his office for a long time, thinking about invisible people. How many of them he'd walked past in his life, never seeing, never wondering. How many talents and capabilities went to waste because no one bothered to look. How many children were putting back school supplies at that exact moment, their potential unmeasured, their futures narrowed by circumstances beyond their control. He'd made one decision in a discount store 6 months ago, a spontaneous investment of a few $100s. That decision had revealed Emily's potential, which had led to a scholarship, which had revealed Jennifer's sacrifice, which had led to this job offer. One stone dropping into a pond, ripples spreading outward. The question wasn't why he'd done it. The question was why anyone wouldn't, given the chance. Why any society would tolerate a system where 9-year-olds counted coins for school supplies, where 32-year-old women worked themselves to exhaustion, where potential went untapped because credentials hadn't been collected or paperwork hadn't been filed. James opened his laptop and sent an email to his director of human resources. He wanted a formal program established, scholarship opportunities for employees' children, tuition assistance expanded, pathways created for non-traditional candidates. The proposal should be ready for the next board meeting. And it should be substantial, not token. Real resources, real opportunities, real change. If Emily Chen had taught him anything, it was that investment in human potential always paid dividends. You just had to be willing to see past current circumstances to future capability. You had to recognize that worth wasn't determined by where someone started, but by what they could become with support. The return on investment wasn't immediate or easily quantified. It couldn't be graphed or projected or displayed in quarterly reports. But it was real. Emily's straight A's were real. Jennifer's acceptance of the job was real. The video with 2 million views was real. The comments from people inspired to help others, those were real too. $300 in school supplies had become a viral video, which had become a year of perfect grades, which had become a scholarship and a job offer. The mathematics of generosity operated on different principles than the mathematics of profit, but the returns were no less valuable. James closed his laptop and left his office, heading home through streets full of invisible people carrying invisible burdens, each one worthy of attention, of investment, of belief in their potential. He couldn't help them all. But he could help some. And some, it turned out, was enough to change everything. Jennifer started work the following Monday. She arrived 15 minutes early, carrying the same worn purse James had noticed during their meeting, wearing a professional outfit that Emily had helped her select from a discount store similar to the one where everything had started. Her supervisor, a veteran facilities manager named Robert Williams, who'd worked his own way up from maintenance crew to department head, showed her around the building and explained her initial responsibilities. The work itself wasn't glamorous. She coordinated cleaning schedules, managed supply orders, fielded complaints about temperature settings and broken equipment. She interfaced with vendors, tracked invoices, maintained spreadsheets that showed who serviced which spaces when. But she absorbed information rapidly, asked clarifying questions that revealed quick understanding, and within 2 weeks had reorganized the filing system to eliminate redundancies Robert hadn't noticed in years. She worked with the same careful precision Emily had shown while shopping for school supplies. Nothing wasted, every action purposeful, every decision calculated for maximum efficiency. Robert reported to James after the first month that Jennifer was the most competent hire they'd made in years, certainly the most motivated. She stayed late without being asked, arrived early without expectation of praise, treated every task as if the entire building's operation depended on its flawless execution. Which, in small ways, it did. Buildings only functioned smoothly when hundreds of invisible tasks were completed correctly and on time. Trash removal, vac maintenance, security coordination, vendor management. These weren't prestigious roles, but they were foundational. Jennifer understood that. She'd spent years doing work others considered beneath notice. She knew that every job mattered if you were the person depending on it being done right. 3 months into her employment, she enrolled in night classes to complete her high school equivalency. She studied after Emily went to bed, the same dining table serving for both her homework and her daughters. Emily, now thriving at her new school with smaller classes and better resources, often helped her mother with math problems. The calculator James had ensured she received now benefiting both of them. The viral video had largely faded from public attention by then, displaced by newer stories, fresher content, the constant churn of the internet's collective focus. But its effects persisted. Several other executives at James's company had watched the video and approached him about similar programs, mentorship initiatives for promising students, job pathways for unconventional candidates, partnerships with schools in underserved areas. James approved them all, not out of sentimentality or PR concerns, but because the math worked. Jennifer was already performing at levels that justified her salary and would likely advance further. Emily's scholarship represented an investment in future talent. She might become an engineer, a doctor, a scientist, someone whose contributions exceeded any measure of initial support. These weren't charitable programs. They were talent pipelines, ways of identifying capacity the traditional hiring process missed. The company's board questioned the initiatives during their quarterly review. Several members raised concerns about dedicating resources to unproven candidates, about the risk of investing in people without traditional qualifications. James responded with data, retention rates for non-traditional hires, performance metrics showing they often outwork conventional employees, long-term cost-benefit analyses. But he also told them about Emily and Jennifer, about potential overlooked and talent wasted, about how a 9-year-old girl counting coins had revealed gaps in their thinking about value and worth. The board approved a 5-year pilot program, 50 positions annually for candidates who showed promise but lacked credentials, full mentorship, clear advancement paths, comprehensive support. They would measure outcomes rigorously and assess whether the program justified expansion. Jennifer learned about the program from Robert, who explained that she'd effectively served as its prototype. Her success had demonstrated the model's viability. She was, without intending it, proof that the traditional pathway wasn't the only route to competence and dedication. She told Emily that night, after they'd both completed their respective homework. Emily, now 10 years old and more confident than she'd been a year earlier, said she wasn't surprised. Her mom had worked harder than anyone she knew. It made sense that other people were finally noticing. The conversation reminded Jennifer of the essay Emily had written for her scholarship application, the one about someone who influenced her. Emily had chosen James Whitmore, not because of his wealth or his business success, but because he'd looked at her, really looked, and seen potential instead of poverty. He'd created an agreement that treated her as capable, as worthy of investment, as someone whose promises meant something. Jennifer understood now that the same thing had happened to her. James had looked past her incomplete education and her worn purse and her accent, had seen 13 years of competence and sacrifice and determination. He'd offered an opportunity that recognized her actual value rather than her documented credentials. A year and a half after the interaction in the discount store, Emily's new school held an awards ceremony. She'd been selected as the top student in her grade, recognized for both academic achievement and positive contribution to the school community. Jennifer attended, wearing clothes she'd purchased with her first substantial paycheck, not from a discount store, not clearance items, but actual professional wear that fit correctly and looked current. James attended too, at Emily's invitation. He sat in the auditorium among proud parents and teachers, watching as Emily walked across the stage to receive her award. She was taller now, her hair longer, her clothes new and properly fitted. She carried herself with confidence, the careful dignity she'd maintained even at her lowest moment now supported by achievement and security. When she reached the microphone to give her brief acceptance speech, she thanked her teachers and her mother and her classmates. Then she thanked James Whitmore, sitting in the audience, for showing her that worth wasn't measured by current circumstances but by future potential. For teaching her that promises mattered, that deals should be honored, that investment in another person was the most valuable transaction anyone could make. The audience applauded. James nodded acknowledgement, uncomfortable with public recognition, but understanding its importance to Emily. She was paying forward the lesson, demonstrating to her classmates that success could come from anywhere if someone was willing to believe in it. After the ceremony, the three of them, Emily, Jennifer, and James, stood in the school hallway while other families celebrated around them. Emily clutched her award, a plaque with her name engraved in brass. Jennifer had tears in her eyes, though she wasn't crying. James maintained his usual composed expression, but something in his face had softened. Emily said she'd been thinking about what to do after high school, even though that was still years away. She knew she wanted to do something that helped people the way James had helped her, the way her scholarship had helped her mother get a better job, the way everything had changed from one moment of attention and investment. James told her she had plenty of time to decide, but whatever she chose, she should remember that the help she'd received wasn't debt to be repaid to him. It was example to be followed. She didn't owe him anything. She owed the next Emily, the next kid counting coins in a store somewhere, the next person whose potential was being overlooked. That was how the system worked, he explained. Someone invested in you, you invested in someone else. Value circulated, multiplied, transformed. It wasn't charity. It was recognition that human potential was a most undervalued resource in any economy, and investing in it paid returns beyond any conventional measure. Emily understood. She'd been watching her mother study at night, seeing proof that people could change their circumstances with support and determination. She'd been experiencing her new school, recognizing that education opened pathways that had been invisible before. She was 10 years old, but she'd already learned more about economics and value and worth than many adults ever did. The conversation ended with Emily promising to stay in touch, to continue sending updates, to let James know how the story continued. He agreed, understanding that his initial investment of $300 had evolved into something larger, an ongoing relationship, a long-term bet on potential, a stake in another person's future. As Jennifer and Emily left the school, heading toward the parking lot where Jennifer's car, recently repaired, now reliable, waited, James watched them go. Mother and daughter, their lives transformed not by luck or chance, but by a decision to see them clearly, to recognize their worth, to invest in their potential. He returned to his own car, where his driver waited, and headed back to his office where 17 new proposals waited for review, each one representing a potential investment, a calculated risk, a bet on future returns. He would evaluate them with his usual analytical rigor, weighing evidence and projecting outcomes. But he would also think about Emily counting coins, about Jennifer working 2 jobs, about potential that existed everywhere if you bothered to look for it, about how the best investments weren't always obvious, weren't always documented in business plans or quarterly reports. Sometimes there were children in discount stores, mothers in worn purses, people the world had decided weren't worth noticing. And sometimes, those investments paid dividends that couldn't be measured in money but mattered more than any amount of profit. Lives changed, potential realized, dignity recognized, worth acknowledged. The work continued. For all of them. But it continued with hope now, with proof that circumstances could change, that the system could work if enough people chose to make it work, that investment in human potential was never money wasted. 3 years after their meeting in the discount store, Emily was 13 years old and starting 8th grade at a prestigious middle school. She'd maintained her perfect grades throughout, had joined the debate team and the math club, had been accepted into advanced science classes typically reserved for high school students. Her scholarship had continued, covering all expenses through graduation, ensuring that financial stress wouldn't derail her education. Jennifer had been promoted twice at James's company. She'd completed her high school equivalency in her first year, then pursued additional certifications in facility management and project coordination. She now supervised a team of 15 people, managing operations for multiple buildings, earning a salary that allowed her to move to a better apartment, to buy reliable transportation, to save for Emily's future college expenses. She no longer worked 2 jobs. She had health insurance, retirement contributions, paid time off. She could attend Emily's school events without requesting unpaid leave or risking her employment. The transformation was visible in countless small ways. Emily's clothes fit properly now, purchased new rather than second-hand, selected for preference rather than price. Jennifer's hands had softened slightly, the constant wear of physical labor replaced by the different demands of desk work and team management. Their apartment contained books beyond schoolwork requirements, a computer that was less than 5 years old, food that represented choice rather than desperate economy. But the most significant change was harder to quantify. They no longer moved through the world with the careful invisibility of people trying not to be noticed. They no longer calculated every purchase 3 times before committing. They no longer carried the constant low-grade anxiety of financial precariousness, the knowledge that any emergency could destabilize everything they'd built. They had security, not wealth. Jennifer remained far from wealthy, but security. The ability to weather disruption, to handle unexpected expenses, to plan beyond next week or next month. The psychological freedom that came from knowing that one bad day wouldn't destroy everything. Emily returned to the discount store once, during her 8th grade year. She went with her mother, both of them shopping for supplies for a community service project Emily's school was organizing, backpack drives for students in underserved areas, the same kind of student Emily had been just 3 years earlier. They walked the aisles Emily had navigated alone as a 9-year-old, selecting notebooks and pencils and folders and calculators. They filled 3 shopping carts with supplies, purchased with money Emily had raised through bake sales and fundraisers, supplemented by donations from classmates and teachers. They loaded everything into Jennifer's car, solid and reliable, no longer held together by hope and minimal maintenance. At the register, Emily watched other shoppers passing through the checkout lanes. She saw a woman counting change for groceries, putting items back when the total exceeded her available money. She saw a teenager examining price tags on work boots, clearly calculating whether he could afford safety equipment for a new job. She saw an older man studying the pharmacy prices, his hand hovering over generic medications, his expression suggesting the math wasn't working in his favor. She understood something then that she hadn't fully grasped at 9 years old, even while living it. Poverty wasn't lack of character or poor planning or insufficient work ethic. It was mathematics that didn't balance, systems that extracted more than they provided, circumstances that compounded beyond any individual's ability to overcome alone. She'd escaped primarily through chance, the chance of being noticed by someone with resources to invest, the luck of James Whitmore needing batteries in that specific store on that specific day. Chance wasn't a system. It wasn't reliable or scalable or just. You couldn't build policy around hoping wealthy strangers would notice struggling children and offer them deals that changed their trajectories. Emily discussed this with James during one of their periodic meetings, which had evolved from email updates to occasional lunches when their schedules aligned. She was 13 now, articulate and confident, capable of engaging with complex ideas. She told him she was grateful for what he'd done, for the investment he'd made, for seeing her when she was invisible. But she also told him that her success, while meaningful to her personally, didn't solve the structural problem. For every Emily Chen who got noticed and helped, hundreds of others were putting back school supplies without any witness to their dignity or potential. James agreed. He'd thought about this frequently over the past 3 years, had grappled with the question of scale. His company's program for non-traditional hires was helping 50 people per year receiving opportunities they wouldn't have accessed through conventional pathways. But 50 wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. The gap between potential and opportunity was massive, systemic, embedded in everything from school funding formulas to hiring requirements to the simple fact that success often depended on who you knew rather than what you could do. He'd expanded his giving beyond individual cases like Emily's. He donated to scholarship programs, funded education initiatives, supported policy advocacy for increased school funding. He used his platform, reluctantly, because public attention had never been his preferred mode, to speak about talent development and human capital investment. He wrote opinion pieces for business publications arguing that companies were overlooking their most valuable resource by maintaining rigid credential requirements that filtered out capable people who'd simply lacked early opportunities. But he also recognized the limits of individual action. Emily was right. Her success was wonderful, meaningful, proof that potential existed everywhere. But it wasn't policy. It wasn't system change. It was rescue, which was valuable but insufficient. Emily said she'd been thinking about this problem, applying the analytical skills she'd developed through debate and advanced math. She'd been researching how social systems worked, how change happened, how individual actions scaled into collective impact. She'd learned that transformation required multiple approaches, direct service helping individuals, yes, but also advocacy changing policies, education shifting cultural attitudes, research documenting needs and testing solutions. She said she wanted to be part of that work, not just benefiting from the system that had helped her, but fixing the system that had failed so many others. She didn't know yet exactly what form that would take. She was only 13, still figuring out her specific path. But she knew the direction. She'd been the girl putting back school supplies. She'd never forget what that felt like, the weight of it, the mathematics of insufficient resources measured against basic needs. And she wouldn't let that memory be wasted on gratitude alone. She would transform it into action. James listened to her. This 13-year-old who 3 years earlier had been counting coins with trembling hands, who now spoke with authority about systems and structures and the difference between individual rescue and collective transformation. He thought about the deal they'd made at that register, his investment in exchange for her perfect attendance and honor roll grades. She'd kept her end of the bargain. She'd exceeded it. But she'd also transformed the terms of the agreement, had expanded it from a personal transaction to a larger commitment. She wasn't just succeeding academically. She was thinking about how to extend that success to others, how to make her rescue replicable, how to build systems that created opportunity rather than waiting for chance to intervene. He told her she was thinking like an investor now, seeing beyond immediate returns to long-term value creation. He told her that whatever path she chose, policy work, education reform, non-profit leadership, business innovation, she should never lose that perspective. The world needed people who'd experienced both sides of the equation, who understood what poverty felt like from inside and what wealth could accomplish from outside, who could bridge those worlds and translate between them. As they finished their lunch and prepared to return to their respective responsibilities, Emily to her advanced coursework, James to his board meetings and investment reviews, he asked her one question. If she could implement any solution to the problem they'd been discussing, any policy or program or system, what would it be? Emily thought for a moment. Then she said she'd ensure that every child had the resources they needed to succeed academically, regardless of their family's economic circumstances. Not through charity or chance, but through policy. Fully funded schools, free supplies, accessible technology, adequate nutrition, stable housing. The things that allowed children to focus on learning rather than surviving. It sounded simple, almost obvious. But James knew it wasn't. It would require massive resource reallocation, political will that transcended party divisions, cultural recognition that investing in children was investing in collective future rather than individual burden. It would require treating education as public good rather than private responsibility. But Emily was right. It was the answer. Not partial measures or pilot programs or individual rescues. Systemic transformation that made Emily's story unnecessary because no child would be putting back school supplies. No parent would be working 2 jobs and still unable to afford basics. No potential would go undeveloped because of inadequate resources. They parted with Emily promising to continue their ongoing conversation, to keep sharing her thinking as it evolved, to maintain the connection that had begun with a simple transaction and had deepened into something more substantial: mentorship, mutual respect, shared commitment to the possibility of transformation. Emily returned to her school, where she attended classes with students whose families had never counted change for school supplies, who'd never questioned whether they belonged, who'd never been invisible. She moved among them easily now, confident and capable, indistinguishable in her academic performance. But she carried something they didn't: memory of what it felt like to be on the other side, to be the person others looked through, to be potential that went unrecognized. That memory would shape everything she did going forward. It would inform her choices, guide her commitments, remind her that worth existed independent of circumstance, that every person deserved the opportunity to prove their potential. She was 13 years old. She had years of education ahead of her, decades of work, an entire life to implement the vision she'd articulated over lunch. But she'd already learned the most important lesson. Transformation was possible when someone chose to see clearly, to invest thoughtfully, to recognize that human potential was the most valuable and most overlooked resource in any economy. Jennifer picked Emily up after school that day, both of them heading home to the apartment they could now afford, the life they'd built from a foundation of sacrifice and chance and a stranger's decision to notice them. They talked about Emily's day, about an upcoming debate tournament, about college possibilities that were suddenly realistic rather than impossible dreams. Neither of them mentioned the discount store, or the counting of coins, or the moment 3 years earlier when everything had changed. They didn't need to. They lived inside the consequences of that moment every day, every choice they now had available, every option that had been closed before and opened since. Somewhere in the city, another child was probably putting back school supplies at that exact moment. Another parent was working multiple jobs and still falling short. Another person's potential was going unrecognized, undervalued, invisible to those with resources to invest. The work continued. For Emily and Jennifer and James and everyone who'd learned through their story that worth could not be measured by current circumstances, that investment in human potential always paid dividends, that dignity was owed to every person regardless of their apparent resources. Not everyone would be noticed. Not every story would end with transformation. But some would. And some was better than none. Some was where system change began. One person, one investment, one decision to see clearly and act accordingly. The world was full of potential waiting to be recognized. You just had to be willing to look.